The surgical light cast harsh shadows across Dr. Elizabeth Harper's face as she extracted the object from Margaret Sullivan's leg. The metallic forceps trembled just slightly as they lifted something that shouldn't exist. A surgical sponge, blue-striped, decomposed. The operating room fell silent, except for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Harper's eyes met her surgical residents across the table. No words necessary. They both understood what degradation patterns like this meant. "How long?" the resident whispered. Harper examined the frayed edges, the calcified tissue clinging to the fabric, the oxidized tracking chips still visible through layers of biological encapsulation. "Decade," she said quietly. "This has been inside her for decades." On the table, Margaret Sullivan's chest rose and fell peacefully under anesthesia, unaware that the answer to 38 years of unexplained pain had just been pulled from her body. Harper placed the sponge in a sterile container, her hands steady now, despite the implications. "We need to find out when. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story." Margaret Sullivan had always believed in speaking up for what was right. For 35 years, she'd stood in front of history classrooms teaching students about courage, justice, and the importance of giving voice to the voiceless. Yet, somehow, when it came to her own pain, she'd learned to stay silent. At 62, Maggie lived alone in a modest craftsman house in Portland, Oregon, the same house she and Thomas had bought in 1980, full of dreams and plans for the future. Thomas had been gone for 10 years now. His absence still felt in the empty side of the bed, in the unused coffee mug that remained in the cabinet, in the rosewood cane that leaned beside the back door, the last thing he'd used before the stroke took him. Their son, Robert, had moved to Seattle after college, building a successful career in software engineering. At 38, Rob was brilliant, driven, and perpetually busy. He called every Sunday, their conversations brief and efficient, both of them pretending the emotional distance between them was just geographical. Maggie had retired from teaching 3 years earlier, though she couldn't quite give it up completely. She volunteered at the community college, teaching online history courses to students of all ages, finding purpose in the familiar rhythm of lectures and discussions. Her home office was lined with books, the walls covered with photographs spanning decades. Her wedding day enacted Rob's birth in 90s, family vacations, and school events marking time's passage. Linda Peterson, her neighbor and closest friend since the early 90s, often remarked that Maggie was the strongest woman she knew. Widowed herself, Linda understood the particular loneliness of a house that had once been full of life. They shared coffee most mornings, traded casseroles, attended the same church, and looked after each other in the quiet, unspoken ways that deep friendship allowed. To anyone looking at Margaret Sullivan's life from the outside, everything appeared manageable, even comfortable. She had her health, or so everyone thought, her home, her volunteer work, her community. She wore her signature cream cardigan with pearl buttons, the one Thomas had given her years ago. She kept fresh flowers from her rose garden on the kitchen table. She maintained the routines that gave structure to solitary days. But beneath the surface of this ordinary life, something had been fundamentally wrong for 38 years. A secret had been living inside her body since the day she gave birth to Rob. A mistake made by hands that should have been careful. a negligence that would remain hidden until the night her body finally refused to carry the burden any longer. The life Maggie had built, the teaching, the widowhood, the quiet independence, had all been constructed around a foundation of unexplained pain that she'd learned to dismiss just as everyone else had dismissed it. That was about to change. 6 months before that October night in the emergency room, Margaret Sullivan had convinced herself the ache in her right leg was nothing more than age catching up with her body. It started in April. During an online history class she was teaching to community college students, mid-lecture about the Battle of Gettysburg. She'd shifted her weight and felt a dull throb radiate from her calf to her hip. She'd rubbed the spot absently while discussing Civil War casualties, never pausing her lesson. The students on their screens noticed nothing. That evening, she found the aspirin bottle in her kitchen cabinet. 2 pills with dinner became her new routine. By June, the dull throb had sharpened into something more insistent. Maggie canceled a volunteer teaching day the first time in 3 years. Linda Peterson, her neighbor, noticed the pronounced limp when Maggie collected her mail. "Maggie, honey, you need to see a doctor about that leg. Can't afford the co-pays on retirement income," Maggie had said, turning away before Linda could see the lie in her eyes. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. She was scared of what they might find. August brought visible changes. The swelling started just above her ankle, a puffiness that made her regular shoes uncomfortable. She switched to wearing long skirts exclusively, hiding the inflammation beneath flowing fabric. When Rob called via FaceTime from Seattle, his face filled the laptop screen with concern she tried to dismiss. "Mom, you look exhausted. Are you feeling all right?" "Just the heat, honey. You know how Portland gets in summer." After she ended the call, Maggie stood in her bathroom and rolled up her skirt. Red streaks spiderwebbed across her skin like roots of some invasive plant. She stared at her reflection for a long moment, then quickly covered the mirror with a towel. The breaking point came at 2:30 in the morning on October 28th. Maggie woke to pain so intense it stole her breath. Her sheets were soaked with sweat that carried a strange metallic odor she couldn't identify. When she tried to stand, her leg buckled beneath her. She crawled to the nightstand where her phone sat charging. Her finger hovered over the 911 button, but pride, that stubborn, destructive pride, made her hesitate. Instead, she called Linda. "I don't want to make a fuss," Maggie whispered. When Linda answered, 15 minutes later, Linda stood in Maggie's bedroom doorway and gasped. The leg had turned a mottled purple-black, swollen to twice its normal size. A dark wound wept fluid onto the sheets. Linda called 911 herself. The EMTs arrived at 3:15. The younger one, barely 25, maintained his professional composure until he saw the wound. He turned away for just a second, long enough to compose himself, before returning with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, we need to get you to the hospital right away," he said, his voice carefully neutral. But Maggie heard him speak into his radio. "Possible necrotizing fasciitis. Expedite transport." She didn't know what those words meant, but she heard the urgency beneath them. At 3:47, the ambulance pulled up to Legacy Good Samaritan Medical Center, the same hospital where she'd given birth to Rob 38 years earlier. Through her pain-fogged mind, she noticed the building had been renovated. modernized, but the cornerstone still read, established. James Chen examined her in the emergency room, initially assuming she'd cut herself and developed a severe infection. When Maggie insisted she hadn't injured herself, he ordered a C-scan, his expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. The T-scanner hummed around Margaret Sullivan at 7:20 that morning, its mechanical embrace triggering something deep in her memory. For a moment, she was back in 1986, lying on a different table in this same hospital, listening to different machines as they prepared to deliver her son. The claustrophobia pressed against her chest. She closed her eyes and counted breaths. In the observation room, the radiologist's expression changed mid-scan. He picked up the phone and called Dr. Harper immediately. When the machine finally released her, Maggie was wheeled back to a private room to wait. The minutes stretched into an hour. She watched the clock on the wall, each tick amplifying her anxiety. A nurse came in twice to check her vitals, but said nothing about results. At 8:45, the door burst open. Rob stood there, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. He'd driven through the night from Seattle, pushing his car past every speed limit. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" His voice cracked as he crossed the room. "You're busy, honey. I didn't want to bother you with a little ache." A little ache. Rob's hands shook as he gripped the bed rail. "Mom, you could have died." Maggie reached for his hand, and they sat in silence until the knock came. Rob quickly wiped his eyes. Dr. Elizabeth Harper entered carrying a tablet with scan images. She was 48, with gray streaking her dark hair, and the kind of steady demeanor that came from 20 years of delivering difficult news. "Miss Sullivan," she began, pulling up a chair, "we found something unexpected in your scan." Rob moved closer to his mother's side. Harper turned the tablet so they could see the image, a cross-section of Maggie's leg, the bone white against the darker tissue. But there, embedded in the muscle, was something that didn't belong, a mass, roughly 4 inches long, with irregular borders. Given the severity of the infection, we're concerned this could be malignant, Harper said carefully. A tumor that's become infected. The word malignant hung in the air like smoke. Rob's face drained of color. Maggie felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "However," Harper continued, her brow furrowing, "there's an anomaly. The mass has metallic density. That's unusual for biological tissue. Metal." Rob's voice was barely audible. "Like cancer with calcification?" Not exactly. This appears to be something foreign, man-made." Harper zoomed in on the image. The object's edges were too geometric, too regular to be natural. Maggie stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what she was seeing inside her own body. "How did it get there?" she whispered. "That's what we need to determine. But Mrs. Sullivan, I need to be direct with you. The infection surrounding this object is necrotizing fasciitis. It's spreading rapidly." Harper pointed to dark areas on the scan that radiated outward from the foreign object like poisonous tendrils. "We have approximately 6 hours before sepsis becomes irreversible. We need to operate immediately to identify and remove whatever this is." Rob looked at the clock on the wall, 9:15. His mind calculated 6 hours meant 3:15 that afternoon, a deadline written in his mother's flesh. "What are the risks?" he asked. The surgery itself is straightforward, but given the advanced infection and your mother's age, there are complications to consider. We'll need to remove significant amounts of necrotic tissue. Is at 10:30. They moved to a small conference room where a billing coordinator appeared with paperwork. The woman's apologetic smile did nothing to soften her words. Mr. Sullivan, your insurance requires pre-authorization for emergency surgery. How long does that take? Rob demanded. Typically 24 to 48 hours. She doesn't have 48 hours. Rob's voice rose. Harper placed a restraining hand on his arm. Rob pulled out his credit card and slammed it on the table. Do the surgery. I'll pay whatever it costs. Rob, you can't afford... Mom. He turned to face her, and she saw tears streaming down his face. You gave me life. I'm not letting you die over insurance paperwork. Maggie's eyes filled. Her son, her baby, had become the parent in this moment. By 11:45, she was in pre-op, signing consent forms with shaking hands. Rob held her other hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm the way she used to comfort him as a child. Remember when I was scared before my appendectomy? Rob said softly. You told me. Courage isn't not being scared. It's being sure and doing it anyway. I'm terrified, Rob. Then you're about to be the bravest person I know. The anesthesiologist began his preparations. As the medication flowed into her IV, Maggie's words began to slur. If something goes wrong, tell your father I love him. Dad's been gone 10 years. Mom? I know, she whispered, her eyes fluttering, but I never got to tell him about the pain. Tell him I'm sorry for hiding it. Then the world faded to black. At 12:30 in the afternoon, Dr. Elizabeth Harper made the first incision into Margaret Sullivan's leg. The surgical theater was cold and bright, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else, the sweet rotten odor of necrotic tissue. Harper worked methodically, her hand steady despite what she was seeing. The infection had spread further than the scan suggested. Beneath the first layer of muscle, the tissue had turned gray-green, dying from lack of blood flow as the body tried desperately to wall off whatever poison festered at the center. The suction device made wet, rhythmic sounds as it cleared away fluid. Harper's surgical resident, a young woman named Patricia Chen, maintained the retractors with hands that grew progressively less steady. More suction here, Harper said, her voice calm but urgent. As they worked deeper into the leg, removing dead tissue, Harper's forceps struck something solid. The metallic clink echoed in the quiet room. Everyone froze. What was that? The surgical tech asked. Harper probed carefully with her instrument. Feeling around the object, it was substantial, foreign, and completely encapsulated in calcified tissue, the body's last-ditch effort to protect itself from an invader it couldn't expel. I need the biopsy forceps, the large ones. The instruments were placed in her palm. Harper worked for several minutes, carefully separating the object from surrounding tissue that had grown around it like tree roots around a stone. Finally, with one careful pull, it came free. The entire surgical team went silent. In Harper's forceps was a surgical sponge blue striped gauze used in operations to absorb the blood. But this one was partially decomposed, its fabric disintegrating at the edges, stained dark with old blood and encrusted with calcium deposits. A small metal tracking chip, oxidized and corroded, was still visible woven into one corner. "My God," Patricia whispered, "that's a lap sponge." Harper held it up to the light, studying it with the concentration of an archaeologist examining an ancient artifact. The degradation patterns told a story written in decay and biological response. "This is from a surgery," Harper said, her voice tight, "and it's been in here for years." "How many years?" the surgical tech asked. Harper examined the extent of calcification, the degree of fabric breakdown, the oxidation on the metal chip. She'd seen retained surgical items before it was rare, but not unheard of, but never one that had been inside a patient this long. "I'd estimate decades. This could be 20, 30, maybe even 40 years old." The surgical team exchanged glances. The resident's hands began to tremble slightly on the retractors. "We need to check for more," Harper said, refocusing on the wound. "If they lost count once—" She probed deeper into the leg cavity, following the path of infection. 10 minutes later, her forceps struck something else. The second sponge was even more deteriorated than the first, practically dissolved into the surrounding tissue. It took Harper another 20 minutes of careful extraction to remove it completely. When the surgery finally ended 3 hours later, 2 surgical sponges sat in sterile containers on the instrument tray, silent witnesses to a catastrophic medical error. In the waiting room, Rob Sullivan had worn a path in the linoleum. Linda Peterson sat in an orange plastic chair, her rosary beads moving through her fingers. When the waiting room doors finally opened at 4:15, Rob nearly ran to meet Dr. Harper. Her surgical mask was pulled down, revealing a face etched with something Rob couldn't quite read, concern mixed with confusion and perhaps anger. "Your mother is in recovery. The surgery went well. We were able to save the leg." Rob's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Thank God, thank God." "Mr. Sullivan, I need you to come with me. There's something we need to discuss." Harper led him to a small consultation room. On the table sat 2 sealed containers. Rob could see something dark and medical inside them, but couldn't make out details. "Mr. Sullivan, we found these inside your mother's leg." Harper opened the first container. Rob leaned forward, his engineering mind trying to process what he was seeing. Fabric, medical gauze, a metal chip, all of it stained and corrupted by time. "I don't understand. What is that?" "These are surgical sponges. They're used during operations to absorb blood and keep the surgical field clear. They have metal tracking chips woven into them so they can be detected if accidentally left behind." The words took a moment to penetrate. "Left behind? You mean someone left these inside her during a surgery? That's the only explanation. These didn't get there any other way. When did this happen?" Harper pulled up Maggie's medical records on her tablet. She scrolled through decades of doctor visits, vaccinations, routine checkups. Only one surgical procedure appeared in the entire file. "According to her records, your mother has only had one surgery in her life. A cesarean section on September 12, 1986. Rob stared at the date. His birthday. September 12th, 1980, the day he was born. His face went pale. "That's when I was born." "Yes." The implications crashed over him like a physical wave. Are you telling me that these have been inside her since I was born? For 38 years? Harper's expression was grim. The degradation pattern suggests yes. The fabric has decomposed significantly. The calcification around them is extensive. Your mother's body has been trying to encapsulate these objects for decades. Rob sat down heavily, his mind reeling. But she's been in pain. She's complained about leg pain for years, for as long as I can remember. That's consistent with a chronic foreign body reaction. Her body was constantly inflamed, trying to fight off these objects. Recently, that chronic inflammation turned into an acute infection. The bacteria found the foreign material and began to attack aggressively. And if we hadn't brought her in, the infection would have gone systemic within 48 hours. Sepsis, organ failure. Without treatment, she wouldn't have survived the week. Rob put his head in his hands. His breath came in short gasps as he processed the information. For months, years, his mother had complained about pain, and he dismissed it, told her it was just getting older, suggested she take some aspirin and rest. I told her it was nothing, he said, his voice breaking. She called me in June, said her leg was bothering her. I told her to ice it and stop overdoing it in the garden. Mr. Sullivan, you couldn't have known. But she knew. She knew something was wrong, and I didn't listen. Harper let him sit with that for a moment before continuing. We need to determine exactly what happened. Who performed the surgery? What hospital protocols were in place? Why these weren't detected? I've already contacted our risk management team and the state medical board. Rob looked up, his grief hardening into something else. Who did the surgery? Who's responsible for this? Harper consulted her tablet again. The attending physician was Dr. Richard Blackwell. He was an obstetrician gynecologist here at Well. It was St. Mary's Hospital then. This facility merged with St. Mary's in 1999 and became Legacy Good Samaritan. I want to talk to him. I want to know how he could. Miss Sullivan, Dr. Blackwell passed away in 2018. Rob stood up so abruptly his chair toppled backward. He paced the small room like a caged animal, his hands clenching and unclenching. So there's no one to hold accountable. He just made a mistake that's been torturing my mother for 38 years, and he's dead. I understand your anger. Rob spun to face her. Do you understand that my mother lived in pain every single day for my entire life? That she probably thought she was going crazy when doctors couldn't find anything wrong? That she almost died because someone didn't bother to count their surgical tools properly? Harper met his anger with steady calm. I understand completely, and I promise you we will get to the bottom of this. At 6:30 that evening, Maggie woke in the recovery room. The world came back in pieces, fluorescent lights, the beep of monitors, the chemical smell of hospital air. Her throat was raw from the breathing tube. Rob's face appeared above her, his eyes red-rimmed and swollen. Why are you crying? Maggie's voice came out as a rasp. Did they have to take my leg? No, Mom, your leg is safe. Rob took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines. But we need to talk about something, he explained as gently as he could, but there was no way to soften the truth. He showed her a photograph Harper had taken of the sponges before they were sent to pathology. Maggie stared at the image for a long time without speaking. When she finally looked up, tears were streaming down her face. "I wasn't crazy," she whispered. "All these years. I thought I was imagining it. I thought I was just weak, couldn't handle normal aging. Mom, your father used to rub my leg every night before bed. He'd ask if it was my old football injury acting up, and I'd say yes because I didn't know what else to say. I didn't understand why it hurt." Her voice broke completely. "I spent 38 years thinking something was wrong with me, that I couldn't handle pain like other people, that I was somehow broken." Rob climbed onto the hospital bed beside her against protocol, against every rule, and held his mother while she cried. She wept for decades of dismissed pain, for nights of confusion, for the credibility she'd lost every time a doctor told her there was nothing wrong. "You're not broken," Rob said fiercely. "You were right. Your body was telling you the truth and everyone else was wrong." The morning after surgery, a team from Legacy Good Samaritans Administration arrived at Maggie's hospital room. 3 people in expensive suits, carrying leather portfolios, a risk management director, a hospital attorney, and a patient advocate whose sympathetic smile seemed rehearsed. Rob stood between them and his mother's bed like a guard. "Mrs. Sullivan," the risk manager began, his voice smooth with practiced empathy. "We want to express our deepest regret for what happened to you. We take patient safety extraordinarily seriously. Do you?" Rob's voice was ice. The attorney cleared his throat. "We're conducting a full investigation into the circumstances of your mother's 1986 cesarean section. However, we'd like to discuss a resolution that might spare everyone the difficulty of protracted litigation." He opened his portfolio and removed a document. "We're prepared to offer a settlement of $50,000, along with coverage of all medical expenses related to this incident. In exchange, we'd ask you to sign a non-disclosure agreement." The number hung in the air. $50,000 more money than Maggie had in her retirement savings. Enough to make the constant worry about copays and prescription costs disappear. Rob snatched the paper from the attorney's hands. His eyes scanned the dense legal text, landing on the key phrase, "The parties agree to refrain from any public statements or legal actions regarding this matter." "You want to buy her silence," Rob said flatly. "We want to resolve this fairly and privately." "Fairly." Rob's voice rose. "You think $50,000 is fair compensation for 38 years of pain, for a medical error so egregious it almost killed her?" The risk manager raised his hands placatingly. "Mr. Sullivan, we understand you're upset. Don't." Maggie's voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned to look at her. "Don't tell my son how he feels." She pushed herself up in the bed, wincing at the pain. Her eyes, still tired from anesthesia, held a clarity that made the administrators shift uncomfortably. "You want me to stay quiet, to take your money and pretend this never happened?" She looked down at the settlement papers Rob still held. "How many others have you paid to disappear?" The attorney's professional mask slipped for just a moment. The answer was written in his silence. "Get out," Maggie said quietly. "I need time to think." After they left, Linda Peterson arrived with a thermos of tea and a fierce expression. When she heard about the settlement offer, She slammed her hand on the bedside table hard enough to rattle the water pitcher. "They're trying to silence you after what they did. After 38 years. I know what they're doing, Linda." "Then why didn't you tell them no immediately?" Maggie looked out the window at the gray Portland sky. "Because I'm 62 years old, retired on a fixed income, and $50,000 would change my life." "But, Mom," Rob started. "Let me finish." Maggie's voice was tired but firm. "I'm also a woman who taught history for 35 years, who taught students to speak up against injustice, to stand up for truth even when it's difficult." She paused. "I need time to decide if I can actually do what I've been telling others to do for decades." It's over the next 5 days. While Maggie recovered in the hospital, Rob began his own investigation. He started with a simple Google search. Dr. Richard Blackwell, Portland, Oregon. The obituary appeared first. Dr. Richard Blackwell, beloved obstetrician gynecologist, passed away March 15, 2018 after a long battle with cancer. He is survived by his wife Helen and daughter Emily. Dr. Blackwell dedicated his career to women's health and delivered over 3,000 babies during his time at St. Mary's Hospital. The comment section below was filled with grateful former patients praising his gentle bedside manner and expertise. Reading them made Rob's stomach turn. But on the third page of search results, Rob found something else. A blog post from 2000 titled, "Has Anyone Else?" The post was short. "I had a C-section at St. Mary's Hospital in Portland in 1987, performed by Blackwell. Since then, I've had chronic abdominal pain and recurring infections. Multiple doctors have told me nothing is wrong, but I know something isn't right. Has anyone else who delivered at St. Mary's in the 1980s experienced similar issues?" Below were 47 comments. Rob read through them with growing horror. "I had my hysterectomy done by Dr. Blackwell in 1988. Constant pain ever since. Doctors say I'm fine, but I know I'm not. My appendectomy, 1986. Same story. Something's wrong, and no one will listen. I thought I was going crazy. Thank you for posting this." Rob took screenshots of everything. Then he noticed the blogger's name, Karen Mitchell. Her profile listed Portland as her location. 2 phone calls later, Rob was speaking with Karen directly. "I knew it," Karen said, her voice shaking. "I knew I wasn't imagining it. How many sponges did they find in your mother?" 2. "How did you know?" "Because they found 3 in me. Last year, I finally convinced a surgeon to go back in and look. 32 years they were inside me. 32 years of people telling me I was anxious, that it was all in my head." "How many women are there?" "I started a private Facebook group after my surgery. When women started seeing my blog post, we have 23 members now. All of us had surgeries at St. Mary's between 1984 and 91, all performed by Dr. Blackwell." Rob's hand tightened on his phone. 23. 23 that we know of. And Mr. Sullivan, Karen's voice dropped. 12 of us are dead. Sepsis, organ failure, infections that doctors couldn't explain. They died before anyone believed something was really wrong. That evening, Rob brought his laptop to Maggie's hospital room and showed her the Facebook group. Karen had given him access as a guest. Together, they read through the Testimonials, stories of pain dismissed, of women called hysterical, of chronic suffering attributed to stress or aging or female hysteria. One post, dated 2019, was from a woman named Patricia Hendricks. Her daughter had posted it after Patricia died. Mom fought for years to get someone to take her seriously. She died on November 3rd, 2020, from septic shock. The coroner found surgical instruments left in her abdomen from a 1989 surgery. She was in pain for 31 years. She begged for help and no one listened. If you're reading this and you had surgery at St. Mary's in the 1980s, please get checked. Don't let my mother's death be meaningless. Maggie read the post 3 times, tears streaming down her face. I could have been her. If Linda hadn't called 911, if I'd waited another day. But you didn't, Rob said. You're alive, Mom. You can help make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. How Dr. Blackwell is dead. The hospital's offering money to keep quiet. What am I supposed to do? Rob pulled up another tab on his laptop. A news article about medical malpractice reform, about the importance of transparency in healthcare errors. You do what you taught me to do. You tell the truth even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Maggie looked at her son, seeing the man he'd become. Then she looked back at Patricia's daughter's post, at the photograph of a woman who died without justice, without acknowledgement, without anyone believing her pain was real. Call the hospital, Maggie said quietly. Tell them I'm not signing anything. Tell them I want to know the whole truth about what happened, all of it. Rob squeezed his mother's hand. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. On November 10th, Rob finally found her, Emily Blackwell, Richard Blackwell's daughter. She was 45 years old and worked as a patient advocate at a hospital in Seattle. An irony that wasn't lost on either of them. When Rob called, she answered on the first ring, as if she'd been expecting this moment for years. I know why you're calling, Emily said before Rob could introduce himself. Your mother had surgery with my father in 1986. How did you? Because you're not the first, and you won't be the last. Her voice carried a weight of exhausted resignation. I've been waiting for this call since I found his journals. They met 2 days later in a coffee shop in Seattle. Emily arrived early, sitting in a corner booth with a cardboard box on the seat beside her. When Rob entered, she didn't smile. She just gestured to the chair across from her with a trembling hand. I'm sorry, she said. Before he could sit down, I'm so sorry for what my father did to your mother, to all of them. Rob remained standing. Did you know while he was alive? Did you know? No, not until after he died. Emily's eyes were red-rimmed, as though she'd been crying for 6 years straight. I found these when I was cleaning out his house. She pushed the box across the table. Inside were leather-bound journals, dozens of them, spanning decades. Rob opened the one on top. The date read September 12th, 1986. Can't find the 4th sponge. Dr. Blackwell had written in neat physician script. Morrison says to close her up anyway. Mother hemorrhaging. Can't wait any longer. Made the call. God forgive me. Rob's hands shook as he read. Morrison. Who's Morrison? William Morrison. He was chief of obstetrics, my father's mentor. Emily wrapped her hands around her coffee cup as if trying to draw warmth from it. He's the one who told my father to leave the sponges, to close patients up without finding all the foreign objects, to not report the mistakes. Rob flipped through more journals. October 1988. Another retained instrument. Morrison insists we don't report it. Says it will destroy the program. March 1991. Patient died from sepsis today. I wanted to confess. Morrison threatened to say it was all my fault, that he'd make sure I lost my license. Your father tried to stop it, Rob said, looking up at Emily. He tried, but not hard enough, not soon enough. Emily's voice broke. Keep reading. April 2005. Met with hospital administration about the retained foreign objects, brought evidence of Morrison's role. They buried the report, said it would expose them to too much liability. Morrison still protected, still practicing. December 2000. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 3 months, maybe 6. I see their faces every night. 23 women. I kept count. 23 lives I damaged or destroyed because I was too afraid to stand up to Morrison. Too afraid to lose everything. Perhaps this cancer is justice. I deserve worse. Rob set down the journal. His vision blurred with tears. 23. Karen's group has 23 members. My father documented every case, Emily said. Names, dates, what was left inside them. He knew. He knew what Morrison was doing, what they were both doing, and he documented it like some kind of penance. But he never made it public. He died with all of these locked in a safe. Why didn't you come forward? You've had these for 6 years. Emily flinched as if he'd struck her. Because I was ashamed. Because my father was respected, beloved. Because I didn't want to destroy his legacy. She looked up, meeting Rob's eyes for the first time. Because I was a coward, just like he was. Some of those women died. They died without anyone believing them. I know. I read the obituaries. I know their names, too. Emily pushed another journal across the table. My father kept newspaper clippings. Deaths, he thought, were related to his mistakes. Women who died of unexplained infections or sudden organ failure. He was probably right about most of them. Rob opened the journal to find pages of obituaries carefully pasted inside, each one annotated in Dr. Blackwell's handwriting. Sarah Chen, 40, died November 22. Likely my fault retained sponge from 1989 hysterectomy. Margaret Torres, 51, died January 20, sepsis. I could have prevented this. Where is Morrison now? Rob asked. Retired, living in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's 79 years old, and he's just living there, playing golf while these women suffered. Emily nodded miserably. I looked him up once. He has a nice house, a wife, grandchildren. His obituary in the medical journals will probably call him a pioneer in obstetric care. Rob stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Not if I have anything to say about it, but to go. Wait, Emily grabbed his arm. Take the journals, all of them. They're evidence. They're what my father should have released years ago. She paused, tears flowing freely now. I can't give those women back their health or their years, but I can give them the truth. Tell your mother I'm sorry. Tell all of them. You should tell them yourself. Emily shook her head. I'm not brave enough for that. Then you're exactly like your father, Rob said, not unkindly. He wasn't brave enough either until it was too late. Don't make the same mistake. That night, Rob and Maggie sat in her hospital room reading through Dr. Blackwell's journals. With each page, the tragedy deepened. This wasn't just medical malpractice. It was systematic cover-up, institutional corruption, and the slow destruction of women's lives for the sake of professional reputation. "We need to confront him," Maggie said finally. "Morrison, he's still alive. He can still answer for what he did. Are you strong enough to travel?" Maggie looked at her leg, still bandaged, still healing from surgery that should never have been necessary. "I've been strong enough for 38 years. I can be strong for one more trip." The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Rob helped his mother out of the rental car. Maggie leaned heavily on Thomas's rosewood cane, her leg still weak from surgery. The modest ranch house before them looked peaceful, with desert landscaping and a well-maintained garden, a comfortable retirement for a man who'd destroyed so many lives. Rob knocked on the door. A woman in her late 70s answered, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her face kind until she saw Rob's expression. "Can I help you?" "Mrs. Morrison." "My name is Robert Sullivan. This is my mother, Margaret. We need to speak with your husband about a patient from 1980. Helen Morrison's face changed instantly, color draining, eyes widening with what looked like recognition. She knew. She'd known something was wrong for years. "William hasn't been well. His heart—" "Please," Maggie said quietly. "It's urgent." Helen stared at them for a long moment, then stepped aside with the resignation of someone who'd been expecting this knock for decades. "Come in." William Morrison sat in a leather recliner in the living room, an oxygen tube running to his nose. He looked frail, diminished. Nothing like the powerful chief of obstetrics he'd once been. But when his eyes met Maggie's, something shifted in his expression. His face crumpled, and tears began sliding down his weathered cheeks. Before anyone spoke a word, "I knew you'd come someday," he whispered. "I just didn't know which one of you it would be." Maggie lowered herself into the chair across from him, gripping her cane. "You remember me? I remember all of you, every single face." Morrison's hands trembled on the armrests. "Margaret Sullivan, September 12, 1980s, cesarean section. I was having a heart attack during your surgery. Didn't realize it until afterward." Rob pulled Dr. Blackwell's journal from his bag and opened it to the relevant page. "That's not what Blackwell wrote. He said you told him to close her up despite missing sponges." Morrison closed his eyes. "Richard wanted to reopen her immediately. We couldn't account for all 4 sponges. But I was terrified. The chest pain, the sweating. I knew something was catastrophically wrong with me. I told him we couldn't wait, that your body would encapsulate anything left behind, that you'd be fine." He opened his eyes, looking directly at Maggie. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. There were others," Rob said. 22 others. We have the journals. We know everything." 23, Morrison corrected, his voice barely audible. 23 that I know of, maybe more. Cases where Richard wanted to report, wanted to go back and fix things, and I stopped him. I threatened him. I told him I'd destroy his career, that I'd make sure everyone thought he acted alone. Helen made a small sound from the doorway, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "William, you told me it was only a few cases. You said they all recovered. I lied to you, too. Helen, I've been lying to everyone for 40 years? Maggie sat perfectly still, her face unreadable. Why, why, why did you do it? Morrison's confession came in a torrent, as if he'd been holding it back for decades. I was 6 months from retirement, chief of the department. I'd built my career, my reputation. After the heart attack, I knew I couldn't operate anymore, but I couldn't admit why. If word got out that I'd had a cardiac event during surgery, every case I'd ever touched would be scrutinized. Lawsuits, criminal charges, everything I'd built would be destroyed. So you destroyed us instead? Maggie said quietly. Yes. Morrison's voice broke. I told Richard that medical errors happen, that the body often handles foreign objects without issue, that reporting would ruin both of us for what might turn out to be nothing. He was young, had a family to support. He believed me at first, but over the years, as patients came back with complications, as some of them died. Morrison's breath hitched. Richard figured out I'd lied. He wanted to confess everything. I threatened him. Mutual assured destruction. If he went down, I'd make sure he went down alone and hard. Rob's hands clenched into fists. Women died. 12 women that we know of died from infections and complications that you could have prevented if you'd just told the truth. I know their names, Morrison said, tears streaming freely now. Sarah Chan, Margaret Torres, Patricia Hendricks. I know all of them. I read their obituaries. I've lived with their faces every day since. You've lived, Rob spat. That's more than they got. Helen approached her husband, her own face wet with tears. Tell them everything, William. Tell them what you haven't told me. Morrison nodded weakly. I've had 3 heart attacks since 2005. Every time I code on that table, I see your faces, all 23 of you. I'm already in hell. He looked at Maggie. I've been funding patient advocacy groups, anonymously, $2 million over the past 20 years. He gestured to a folder on the side table. Helen brought it over with the shaking hands. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer records, donation receipts, organizations dedicated to patient safety, medical error prevention, victims' rights, all funded by anonymous donations that Rob could now trace back to Morrison. I thought maybe I could balance the scales, as Morrison said. I know it doesn't bring them back. It doesn't fix what I did. But I tried to buy your way out of guilt. Rob's voice was sharp. 12 women are dead. My mother lived in agony for 38 years. You think money fixes that? No, Morrison said simply. Nothing fixes it. I'm dying, Mr. Sullivan. Congestive heart failure. I have maybe 6 months. And I'll die knowing I spent 40 years as a coward. Maggie had been silent through most of the confession, but now she spoke. Why didn't you just admit it in 1986? Why not tell the truth from the beginning? Pride, fear, self-preservation. Morrison's voice was hollow. In Korea, I worked in a field hospital. We made impossible choices under impossible circumstances. Soldiers died on my table despite everything I did. I thought I'd made peace with that, learned to live with the cost of impossible decisions. But there was nothing impossible about your surgery. Mrs. Sullivan, it was routine. The only impossible thing was my pride. I chose my reputation over your health, over 23 women's health. There's no war to blame for that, just cowardice. The room fell silent, except for the quiet hiss of Morrison's oxygen tank. Maggie stared at the man before her, frail, dying, drowning in decades of guilt. She thought about the anger she'd carried, the years of pain, the nights Thomas had rubbed her leg while she pretended she didn't know why it hurt. Finally, she stood, leaning on her cane. Dr. Morrison, you stole 38 years from me. You stole my credibility, my peace of mind, my ability to trust my own body. My husband died never knowing why I was in pain, and I never got to tell him it wasn't in my head. Morrison nodded, unable to speak. But I didn't come here for an apology. I came here because there are 23 women whose stories need to be told. 12 who can't tell their own stories anymore. Will you testify? Will you make a public confession and name everyone who helped cover this up? Morrison looked up at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. Yes, I'll tell everything. The hospital administrators who buried the 2000 report, the insurance companies who paid quiet settlements, all of it. I'll give you names, dates, documentation. Why? Rob demanded. Why would you do that now? Because I'm dying anyway, Morrison said simply, and because Mrs. Sullivan is right. Those 12 women deserve to have their stories told, to have someone acknowledge that their pain was real, that they weren't crazy or weak or imagining things. If my confession is the only justice they get, then that's what I'll give them. Helen stepped forward. I'll help. I'll testify about what I knew when I knew it. I'm complicit in this, too. I heard him on the phone, making threats. I saw him destroy documents. I knew something was wrong, and I said nothing. Maggie looked at them both, an old doctor and his wife. Faces ravaged by guilt and illness and the weight of secrets kept too long. She felt Rob's anger radiating beside her, his desire for vengeance, for punishment. But Maggie felt something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of release. We're going to the media, she said. We're going public with everything. Your confession, Richard's journals, the hospital cover-up, the whole truth. I understand, Morrison said. I'm ready. I should have been ready 40 years ago, as they prepared to leave. Maggie turned back one more time. Morrison, did you ever think about us? About what our lives were like? Living with what you did? Morrison met her eyes, his own filled with unspeakable sorrow. Every day, every single day for 40 years. Good, Maggie said quietly. You should have. The press conference was scheduled for December 10th, 3 weeks after Maggie and Rob returned from Arizona. Legacy Good Samaritan Hospital's legal team tried everything to stop it, threatening lawsuits, offering increased settlements, even attempting to get an injunction. But Dr. Morrison had already sent his written confession to the state medical board, the FB, and 3 major news outlets. The story broke before the hospital could contain it. Within 48 hours, the hashtag St. Mary's Survivors was trending nationally. News vans lined up outside the community center where the press conference would be held. Maggie watched the coverage from her living room, her leg propped up, still healing but growing stronger each day. You don't have to do this, Linda said, sitting beside her friend. Morrison's already confessed. The FBI is investigating. You could stay private, let others handle it. And what about the women who can't speak for themselves? Maggie asked. The 12 who died thinking they were crazy, that their pain didn't matter. Someone has to say their names out loud. On the morning of December 10th, Maggie put on her best dress, navy blue, the one she'd worn to Thomas's funeral. Rob drove her to the community center, helping her navigate the crowd of reporters and cameramen. Inside, 11 other women waited, the surviving members of the St. Mary's Survivors Group. Karen Mitchell stood and embraced Maggie immediately. "Thank you," Karen whispered. "Thank you for having the courage to start this." At exactly 10 o'clock, William Morrison took the podium. He looked even more frail than he had in Arizona, the journey and stress clearly taxing his failing heart. Helen stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Emily Blackwell sat in the front row, her father's journals stacked on the table before her. Morrison's statement was devastating in its completeness. He read for 45 minutes, detailing every case, every cover-up, every threat he'd made to keep Richard Blackwell silent. He named hospital administrators who'd buried the 2005 internal audit. He described the system that had prioritized institutional reputation over patient safety. When he finished reading the list of 23 names, pausing for a long moment on the 12 who had died, the room was silent except for quiet crying. "I cannot undo what I did," Morrison said, his voice breaking. "I cannot give these women back their health, their years, their peace of mind. I can only expose the system that enabled these errors and the culture of silence that let them continue. If my confession helps change that system, perhaps it will be worth something, but I harbor no illusions that it absolves me. It does not." Then Maggie stood. Rob helped her to the podium, her cane clicking against the floor. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. "My name is Margaret Sullivan," she began, her voice steady and clear. "On September 12, 1986, I gave birth to my son Robert. It should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, it began 38 years of pain that doctors told me was imaginary, that family members suggested I was exaggerating, that I began to believe was my own failure to cope with normal aging." She told her story, the ignored symptoms, the dismissals, the night she nearly died. She spoke about Thomas rubbing her leg every evening, never knowing why it hurt, about feeling like she was losing her mind when every test came back normal. "Morrison's actions stole more than my health," Maggie said. "They stole my credibility, my self-trust, my ability to advocate for my own body. When women say something is wrong, we need to be believed. Our pain is not hysteria. Our instincts are not paranoia. And when the medical system fails us, it must be held accountable." The reporters erupted with questions, but Maggie held up her hand. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here so the next woman who says something's wrong is taken seriously, so the next doctor thinks twice before prioritizing reputation over truth, so the 12 women who died without justice are finally heard." She returned to her seat as Karen Mitchell took the podium, then Patricia Williams, then each of the surviving women. Each told her story, each named the years of suffering. And finally, Sarah Chen's daughter stood and spoke about her mother's death, her voice shaking but determined. "My mother begged for help. She knew something was wrong. She died thinking no one believed her. But I believe her. And now the world knows she was right." The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. The FBI discovered that legacy Good Samaritans Current CEO David Harrison had been an intern in 1986. He'd witnessed the culture of silence, had seen reports buried, and had been powerless to speak up as a junior employee. Now, as CEO, he provided investigators with decades of internal documents proving systematic cover-up. Criminal charges were filed against 3 former hospital administrators for conspiracy and obstruction. Morrison was indicted, but deemed too ill for trial. The hospital faced federal oversight and fines totaling $60 million. By late December, 31 women had come forward with similar stories, though not all from Dr. Blackwell's cases. The investigation revealed the problem was widespread retained surgical items affecting an estimated 1 in every 1,000 surgeries nationwide. The settlement offers came quickly. Legacy. Good Samaritan offered the 23 identified victims $47 million total. Rob urged his mother to accept her portion over $2 million. But Maggie hesitated. "What about the families of the women who died?" she asked. "What about establishing something permanent after negotiation?" Maggie's settlement and those of 4 other survivors went into a foundation, Maggie's voice, dedicated to patient advocacy, medical error prevention, and supporting victims of healthcare negligence. Karen Mitchell became president. Emily Blackwell joined as director of patient safety education, using her father's story to train medical students about the cost of silence. January brought personal healing. Rob had taken a 3-month leave from his software engineering job and moved temporarily to Portland. Each morning, he helped Maggie with physical therapy exercises. Each evening, they cooked dinner together in the kitchen where Thomas had once made breakfast. One night, as they washed dishes, Rob spoke quietly. "I'm thinking about going to law school, medical malpractice law." Maggie smiled. "Your father would be proud. I think he'd be prouder of you." "Mom, you changed everything." "I just told the truth." The world changed itself. But the hardest moment came in late February. Helen Morrison called with the news that William was in the hospital, his heart finally failing. Against Rob's protests, Maggie asked to visit him. "Why?" Rob demanded. "After everything he did, because I need to close the circle, for me, not for him." The ICU was cold and sterile. Morrison lay connected to machines that beeped rhythmically, measuring out his remaining hours. His eyes opened when Maggie entered, widening with surprise. "You came." "I did." "Why?" Maggie pulled a chair close to the bed. "Because forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me." Morrison's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve." "No." Maggie interrupted. "You don't. But I deserve peace. I deserve to live the rest of my life without carrying hatred that gives you power you don't deserve. So I forgive you." Morrison, not because what you did was acceptable, not because 38 years of pain were okay, but because I refuse to let you control one more day of my life. "Thank you," Morrison whispered. "Don't thank me, just rest. And when you see those 12 women, if there's anything after this, you tell them their pain mattered. You tell them they were right all along." Morrison died 3 days later. His obituary mentioned his confession, his crimes, and his final attempt at redemption. The comment section divided sharply between those who called him a monster and those who saw a man destroyed by his own cowardice. Maggie didn't read them. She'd said what she needed to say. March brought legislative victory. Senator Patricia Williams, no relation to the survivor, introduced the Patient Safety and Transparency Act, quickly nicknamed Maggie's Law. It mandated immediate reporting of retained surgical items, created a federal compensation fund, imposed criminal penalties for institutional cover-ups, and required annual hospital audits of surgical protocols. On March 29th, the bill passed both houses with overwhelming bipartisan support. The signing ceremony at the White House included Maggie, the surviving members of the St. Mary's Group, and representatives of the families of the 12 women who died. President Katherine Morrison. Another coincidence of names invited Maggie to stand beside her as she signed. This law represents the voices of 31 women who refused to be silenced, who transformed their pain into purpose, their trauma into change. Maggie received the ceremonial pin and handed it to Rob. "This is your legacy, too. You saved my life by believing me." And Rob hugged his mother tightly, no longer embarrassed by tears. "You saved your own life, Mom, by finally speaking up." Spring arrived in Portland with an explosion of color. Maggie's rose garden, neglected during her illness, bloomed with new growth. She spent hours working in the soil, her legs strong enough now to kneel and stand without assistance. The cane Thomas's rosewood cane stayed propped by the back door, a reminder but no longer a necessity. In April, Maggie returned to teaching. She'd been asked to develop a course at Portland Community College, The History and Ethics of Medical Practice. On the first day, over 60 students packed the classroom, ranging from 18 to 80 years old. "Let me tell you a story," Maggie began. "It starts in 1986 in a hospital not far from here, on what should have been the happiest day of my life." And she taught for 2 hours, and when she finished, the room erupted in questions. One young pre-med student raised her hand. "Mrs. Sullivan, how do you not hate the doctors involved?" Because hate would mean they still controlled my life. I took that power back. Another student asked, "What's the most important lesson from your experience?" Maggie smiled. "That courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about speaking up when your voice shakes. It's about showing up even when you have every right to walk away. And it's about believing yourself when everyone else says you're wrong. Because sometimes you're the only one who knows your truth." On Mother's Day, Rob arrived with an armful of wildflowers, blue ones, like the flowers from his parents' wedding. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "I got a letter today," Maggie said, pulling an envelope from her cardigan pocket, "from a woman in Ohio. She'd been in pain since her surgery 3 years ago. Doctor said it was anxiety. After seeing our story, she went back and demanded they listen. They found a surgical clip that had migrated. She's healing now." Rob read the letter, his eyes misting. "How many letters like this have you received? Hundreds, maybe thousands?" Maggie looked at her son. This is why it was worth it." The scar on her leg was visible below her skirt. She no longer hid it. Rob gestured to it. "Does it still hurt?" "Sometimes. But now I know why, and that makes all the difference." As darkness fell, they sat in comfortable silence. the kind only shared between people who've survived something together. Inside the house, Maggie's phone buzzed with messages from the foundation, from survivors, from women finding their voices. This Mary's Survivors Group had grown to include over 800 members, women who'd experienced medical errors and finally had a place where their pain was believed. Rob left as the stars emerged. Maggie stood at her door, watching his car disappear down the street. Then looked up at the night sky. "We did it, Tom," she whispered to her late husband, to the universe, to herself. "We changed things." Inside, she sat at her desk and opened her laptop. A new email waited from the foundation. Another woman's story. Another voice added to the chorus. Maggie began typing her response, her fingers steady on the keys. The message was simple. "I believe you. Your pain matters. You are not alone." And somewhere out there, another woman would read those words and finally, after years of being dismissed, feel heard. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply tell the truth about our pain. For 38 years, Margaret Sullivan believed what doctors told her, that her suffering was imaginary, that she was overreacting, that she should just learn to live with it. How many of us have heard those same words? How many times have we dismissed our own instincts because someone with authority told us we were wrong? Margaret's story reminds us that our bodies know things our minds try to rationalize away. When she finally spoke up, when she refused to accept "it's nothing" as an answer, she didn't just save her own life, she gave voice to hundreds of women who'd been silenced by a system that valued reputation over truth. Her journey from victim to advocate shows us that it's never too late to reclaim our power, to demand to be heard, to transform our deepest wounds into our greatest purpose. The pain we've carried doesn't have to be meaningless. Sometimes it becomes the very thing that helps others heal. Have you ever ignored persistent pain because you didn't want to seem like a complainer? What would you say to someone who's afraid to speak up about unexplained symptoms? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.